Well, welcome, Jenny. It's looking forward to having a conversation today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy life to come on here and give us a little explanation of, or a greater understanding of these types of tests. So I usually like to get the guests to explain who they are, where they came from, and how they ended up here. So maybe you can give us a little bit of your backstory.
Okay, thanks. I am Jenny Garley. I have a let's see, I have an undergrad in just bachelor's of science, and then I have a master's in food science and technology with an emphasis in microbiology. Also, because if you get a master's in microbiology, you don't have to deep dive into math. So just FYI, everyone going to school. And you don't have to, and no cadaver work, which is not really for me either. So I actually came from the fishing industry. My family is commercial fishermen, and I did live in Alaska for a while. So I worked in several laboratories up there, and that's really where I got a foothold in laboratories. And I came back here and I worked for the NFL. It's the National Food Laboratory, and I did a lot of work over in Europe for them for processing food and looking at the microbiology behind that. And then I decided I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. Took some time off to have some kids. Was brought into a roundtable just discussion when John Kempf came to town, and I liked what he had to say. And so I gave him my resume and for some reading material on the way home. I worked for AEA for about 5.5 years, advancing eco agriculture, where in 2014, I learned about SAP analysis, and I learned that that's definitely the area that I would like to learn more about. So I got to learn from the owner of a SAP lab in the Netherlands when he came here to the US. And I jumped ship and I went to another laboratory inside the US because I was also in charge of international shipping, which was not getting any easier. So I decided I didn't want to keep doing international shipping. And I went to New Age in 2020. And I oversee all the SAP for all over the US. I specialize in California crops because that's where I'm from. That's where I am. My roots are in the berry industry, but we have so many different crops here. We also work in Canada, Mexico, and South America.
Wow, that's busy.
Yeah.
All right, I don't even know where to start. But so are you working with like Ryder and Driscoll and those guys with the berries?
So yes, but we have a lot of distributors, and I work with our larger distributors, and they actually sell to Ryder growers. Ryder and Driscoll and Dole and all the big guys, they don't own all the acreage that they harvest from. They have independent growers. So yes, we do work with them, but as a third party through our distribution. I'm called in when there's a problem. They need a higher level of understanding or something of that nature, but I don't work directly, which that's why I love distribution. I work with one or two people and they work with hundreds. So that's use of my time. So I don't get 100 phone calls a day. I wish I could, but sometimes I lose my voice actually in the summertime. I'm on the phone so much. So that's.
I hear that a lot. All right. So let's just dive right in.
Okay.
SAP tests became somewhat, well, I don't want to call it mainstream because I don't believe it still is mainstream, but well more into the attention of the masses. Starting around, I think it was like 2020, somewhere around there. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, because I started with it in 2014, and it had really only made it to the US around 2013, maybe even late 2012. So it took, about 6 to 7 years to gain some speed and understanding. So yeah.
And prior to that, it was leaf tissue, and that was kind of the new age before SAP came involved. And So maybe you can give the audience a brief explanation of the difference between sap and tissue.
Yes, absolutely. So if everybody pictures a leaf in their hand that they can have and hold and take home and touch and feel, all of the nutrients that are made up in that leaf, in the cellular structures, and then in the vascular bundle, which is the xylem and phloem, all of those nutrients, which are available and unavailable, we'll call it total nutrients, is ashed. And that is a tissue analysis. And sap analysis, taking that same leaf, is just taken mainly from the vascular bundle, which is the xylem and phloem, which is nutrients that is unincorporated into the cellular structures, which is basically free nutrients. So it's tissue is overall nutrients. Sap analysis is nutrient uptake.
So we maybe look at it as mobile and immobile.
Actually, sap analysis looks at mobile and immobile, and tissue cannot give you mobility because it's a fixed point. You take usually one age of a leaf, and it's also fixed nutrients and also nutrient uptake. So you can't really have mobility when your nutrients are already fixed into a cellular structure.
And something I always preach is leave the leaves because they're fertilizer, right?
Leave the leaves. Yes. So if you have the capability of reincorporating the leaves into the ground, usually with a microbial product, which is super helpful to break down the residue, especially not leaving corn stalks, broccoli stalks. Oh my gosh, those don't incorporate very well at all, and usually taken away from the field. But if you can incorporate, you're incorporating the nutrients back into the soil. And unfortunately, if you try to incorporate the leaves, the residue, and you don't, that can harbor a lot of pathogens. So if you're going to incorporate, and do it well, otherwise you're setting up a house and a home potentially for soil pathogens.
Thank you. That's beautiful. All right. So back to mobile versus immobile. You said that the sap is actually immobile as well. Can you expand on that a little?
Yeah. So for a mobile nutrient, a physical symptom of a mobile nutrient, say nitrogen, that yellowing leaf, older leaf, that's a visual symptom, can be a visual symptom of nitrogen deficiency. And the reason you're seeing that yellowing is because nitrogen is incredibly mobile within the plant. The plant can take nitrogen from the old leaf and move it to the new leaf on demand. And when the plant is not being supplied with enough nitrogen through the roots, it starts stealing from the cookie jar, the old leaf. And when it does it over and over and over again, you end up with that yellowing visual symptom. And really, so mobile nutrient, the real name for mobile nutrients is phloem mobile. So all nutrients are xylem mobile, but not all nutrients are phloem mobile. So that is a great example of a phloem mobile nutrient. A low phloem or no phloem would be calcium. Calcium actually can move every now and again under very stressful situations, but it usually means cellular death. And I hope that the plants are not getting to that state. But for the majority of the plants in their growing conditions, calcium is has very low mobility. So when the plant is taking up calcium through the roots and up into the xylem, look at the xylem as a one-way elevator. So the plant will fill the calcium in the old leaves first, and then the middle leaves, and then the new leaves, which is why that physical calcium deficiency is found in the top of the plant, as where nitrogen deficiency is found at the bottom of the plant. The difference between phloem mobile, which is nitrogen, and not phloem mobile, which is calcium. But calcium, if you put it on as a foliar and you do spray the top of the plant, calcium stays where it's at. So you love foliars, but they are a little bit of a band-aid because those new leaves that barely got any foliar at all in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they could be calcium deficient, even though you just put on a foliar. It's because the plant can't take from those old leaves and move up to the new leaves. It's not able to do that with calcium. Calcium is xylem mobile only.
Oh boy. Okay, so couple points because that was good. That was really good. It has been a basic understanding that in soil chemistry that the plant can control calcium. The plant can take up excess calcium and then use it as an exudate. So is
Yeah.
that more or less like a reformulation of the calcium, perhaps, like turning it into maybe a secondary metabolite to leak it back out?
Well, I mean, the majority of calcium actually can be when you're talking about too much calcium taken up, not about roots, about shoots. The calcium is taken up and stored in the newer leaves. Actually, it's very rare to see that you see actually more calcium in the newer than the older leaf, which is why foggy conditions, too much water, too little water, all affecting transpiration affects calcium. So when you're talking about root exudates, that could mean that the roots are actually taking up calcium and making into something else and pushing it back out, because calcium won't be taken up from the shoots and pushed down. But the roots are kind of little engines in themselves. I mean, when cobalt is taken up, the majority is moved down to the roots. So there's I don't know about calcium exudates, but I do know that when the plant is needing it for the shoots and then also going into the fruit, it's a one-way elevator majority. A lot of nutrients are stored in the roots, and we do sap analysis of the roots for that very specific reason, actually.
So that's just, again, such a great way to explain it, because the roots themselves are almost like a separate entity to the plant. It's like they are connected to the soil. And I often ask this of people on the shows, all right, so tell me, where does the plant end and the soil begin? And it's one of those, go ahead, I'll ask it to you. Where do you think the plant ends and the soil begins?
I mean, probably where the xylem starts.
So the rhizosphere?
Could be, but well, no, the xylem's not in the rhizosphere. The xylem is inside the plant, taking up water, macro and micronutrients, going up into that vascular tissue itself. The rhizosphere, no, that's like where endophytes are, and that's where mycorrhizal fungi are attached with their hyphae. That's like the living zone that you're speaking of.
Gotcha.
And that's really where, I mean, it might not even be where the soil, ends and where the root begins. It might even be where that's the area where all the beneficial and pathogenic soil species are, living species.
Exactly.
I mean, that's that zone.
And it's such a trick question, because then if you take into consideration water, then there is no definition between the plant and the soil, because that rhizosphere expands and contracts based on soil moisture. And that's why I love that question. It's a real heady one. And
it is. Yeah.
Here's another one I love. Like, who's in control of the planet? Are the plants or are the animals?
Well, if there's a disease or a pathogen, I definitely have to say the animals. If the plants aren't given enough tools, they can come out of it, but it's like humans, we can succumb to diseases and sadly pest pressure if we are not given the right tools, and then we are not in charge either. If the plants are given the correct tools, there's a good chance that they will they will grow out of it, but not all plants have the right tools, especially in commercial cropping systems.
Great answer. Great answer. Yeah, I'm sorry, I got way off topic there, but I love to have fun and poke the bear once in a while. Because, I was always in believed that the animals were more in control of the planet than the plants. But then when I started to really think about it, it's like the plants are growing for consumption so that we grow and then we die and feed them again. Right. So the plants are kind of like the rulers of the planet, because without them, nothing would be here. So instead, they're growing and pushing fruit and vegetative growth so that the animals and the humans can consume them, so that we're actually the food for them when we return back to the earth. So it's just a mind twist, right? But and now I got you going, what is he talking about?
Well, I would say that a plant's goal is to reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
That's I think where its end goal is. To feed everyone, yes and no, but really the plant is putting all of its nutrients into new shoots and then into its seeds to reproduce. That's really the goal of a plant, in my opinion.
Agreed, 100%. But if you take it even further, it gets crazy.
Right. If you take it even further, but I'm not sure the plant knows that.
Ooh, what a plant knows, right? I'm sorry, I'm gonna really twist this fucking thing up. So plants, it is believed that they have 12 senses now, and that humans only have 6.
You are skilled in that area. Far over myself.
And again, science is really as science has moved away from reduction into interdisciplinary realms, a lot of really interesting stuff has come out, and most of it in the last 5 years. So yeah, there's a lot to be looked into deeper. But it's like everything in science. The deeper you look, the more confusing and complicated it is. So, and it's like you think you know something today. Well, tomorrow a paper comes out and discredits everything that we believed up until this point in time. So it's a tricky place to hang out. That's for sure. So let's reel it back in now that I've shot us out into left field somewhere. So back to the tissue versus the sap, and one of the things that I think the last time we talked about on the phone was a really good way for the audience to look at it as like the tissue is actually like the bone, what was there, what was consumed to build that leaf, where the sap is what's the leaf is asking for, or the shoot is asking for, or the plant is asking for. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah. So one nutrient, or there's a few nutrients, but one nutrient in general that you'll see a big discrepancy between tissue and sap is iron. So iron is many times taken up very fast, especially if you're growing annuals, because that plant needs to photosynthesize and that plant needs chloroplast in order to photosynthesize, and iron goes into the creation of chloroplast. So it's going to take up quite a bit of iron to be able to create chloroplast to put on structure and actually build the plant. So if you take a tissue sample, say 1/3 or even halfway through that growing season, you're going to see a very high amount of iron in that tissue. And very rarely does a tissue sample say a plant is deficient. And that is the reason why, is because iron is needed in high demand early on. But in sap analysis, you can see iron uptake, and many times it is quite low. So you'll see the accumulation of iron. The plant will never mobilize iron because it's involved in photosynthesis and the chloroplast. So it's not going to take out iron from those from that pathway, and also from that structure. So many times growers come to us because they see iron deficiency in the plants, or they assume that it is. They're looking at their tissue. They're feeling a little frustrated. So they go, oh gosh, we're going to try sap, and it's almost always low iron uptake. So anyway, it can be a great discrepancy between accumulation and actual daily uptake.
Well said. Well said. And you know what? I'd love to back it up again, because that comment about nitrogen stealing is so important, because you'll get these farmers who are like, oh my God, my leaves are yellowing, my leaves are yellowing. And it's more because they did not properly support the plant with nitrogen, so it had to steal it from an older leaf so that it could continue on its path. And
absolutely. Or it could have a toxicity of chlorides. You don't know.
Oh, good one. I didn't think about that. That's a great another.
It's on the rare side, but it happens.
So are there other nutrients that the plant itself can steal from older parts of the plants? Are there many?
Yes, there's many, actually. It's nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, magnesium, actually chloride and sodium. But the majority of the plants are actually pushing chloride and sodium down to the lower parts of the plant to keep it away from the baby plants, but they do need a little bit of both of those elements. And then sulfur is considered mobile if you want to really look into the research, but it's got a list of contingencies, and it's really, really highly linked to nitrogen. So a lot of times people have a sulfur deficiency, and it's really because they can't get the sulfur to move, and many times it's linked to their nitrogen mobility. So I kind of don't want to do a deep dive into that one right now. But if we're just talking about NPK and magnesium, those are macromobiles. So if you're seeing any kind of symptoms on the lower parts of your plant, not always, but many times it could be NPK or mag, or it can be a toxicity of chloride or sodium. And sometimes sodium toxicity and potassium deficiency look very similar. They can, and they're also going to be on the older leaves. And they also can go hand in hand. You can have a sodium toxicity and a potassium deficiency at the same time.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. So we bounce into soil chemistry, and we talk about the saturated paste test, and then we talk about exudate. So the plant can control, we call the saturated paste test, or the CEC, cation exchange capacity, or sites specifically, as the storage, as the bank account for the plant. And if the plant's looking for potassium or magnesium, it can easily leak out calcium and push those off the CEC sites and then uptake them regularly. The only problem is sodium and potassium are both single bonded electrons, so they're easier to pull off and go back to, okay, the plant wanted potassium, there wasn't potassium there, they accidentally uptook the salt instead because they're potassium deficient. So you just gave like a solid answer to understanding why those tests are so critical, and understanding the health of the plant, because when the plant's suffering and not as healthy, it doesn't have the ability to produce the exudates, to pull from the bank accounts. So it's like a downward spiral. So it goes back to really understanding nutrition in the soil, as well as trying to understand what is moving throughout the plant to maintain that higher level of growth. And of course, at the end, we're looking for the production, whether it's the fiber, whether it's the fruit, or whatever. So again, a really important link between understanding soil chemistry and mobile nutrients throughout the plant itself. Now, it's interesting that you start talking about sulfur and nitrogen relationships. Have you any understanding of the calcium nitrogen relationship?
Oh, I would, we've been no, I'm going to say no, because I look at calcium differently than I look at nitrogen. So and I look at calcium at very specific times in a plant's stage of growth, especially cell division. I'm a little bit narrow-minded and I need to be better, but normally when everybody comes awake in the springtime, it's all about calcium and it's all about where your window is for cell division. I mean, cherries, unfortunately, have a very, very short cell division, 10 days, 2 weeks. And, avocados are like kings. They're 3 months, right? I mean, you can just be as slow as you want getting the calcium out there. So when I talk about calcium, I talk to growers, it's really trying to get it into your stage of growth. That cell division window is so important for large acre ag because you can push in a ton of calcium, but if you miss that cell division window, gracious, you could be wasting a lot of money.
Good answer. Great answer. Yeah, there's, and again, it's like there's nothing hard about the discussion of the relationship between calcium and nitrogen specifically, although Steiner, biodynamics, Rudolf Steiner, had hinted to there being a relationship between them. In some of the work that I've done in trying to slow down the thermophilic effects of compost to hold some of that nitrogen back, because as you well know, it either gases off in an ammoniacal form or in a methane form. So we want to try to hold that nitrogen in. And so I started playing around with calcium in fresh composting making. And I did see that it did, in fact, slow that process down. So that's why I was kind of, sussing out that relationship to see if you knew anything more about it, because there's so few people that can have that kind of conversation.
Well, the other main function of calcium in the plant that people sometimes overlook is what you might be alluding to, is that calcium, of course, is for cell walls quality and structure, but calcium is also the master communication nutrient. So if you don't have enough calcium, your plant has a hard time communicating with what its needs are via the roots. And so usually when calcium increases, all the other nutrients increase, whether you have supplied it or not. And I see it time and time and time again. And it's just because the communication lines are being increased.
So calcium is the gateway drug.
It is master communicator of all nutrients.
I love it. I fucking love it. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about salt toxicity. I recently working on a project where your lab actually did some data. I don't know if you're in the loop on it. The Cowboys, do you see any of their paperwork, or are you more ag?
I get called when usually people have trouble, our distributors, or I'm in charge of all of our education this winter. So that's no.
So he's got a real unique situation. I love Chris, and hopefully I'll get him on the show at some point in the future.
Oh, the Cowboys. You mean the Cowboys, like the football?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes, I know the project. Yes. Sorry,
Right.
I meant just Cowboys in general. No, I don't know.
So yeah, he's got the most incredibly tough job. He transitioned out of synthetics. He started transitioning out of synthetics many years ago. I met him, I think it was between 3 and 4 years ago. He sent me off a Haney report indicating that he had zero protozoa and that he was really struggling to get his nutrient cycling system up and running. He was working with a wonderful mycologist, good friend of mine, Efren, to better understand how to get mycorrhizae to associate with his plants, because he really wanted to push away from the synthetics completely. He's in a really tough situation. It's engineered soil, so 99% sand, 1% organic matter. When I met him, he was scared to death of organic matter because that turns the field mushy. But as I explained to him, I go, look, without some form of organic matter, you can't you can't get to the next level with saprophytic fungi and protozoa and all the other soil food web constituents. And so we worked, I'd say probably about a year, really started to turn the field around, and something happened. They had to rip up all the sod, did it again. He recolonized it, was back up to a sweet level. Then he had to rip out the center of the field because the GM didn't like the way the turf looked. Brought in all synthetic turf, plugged it into a biological system, and turned a big brown shit stripe right down the middle of the field. Then they ripped up the whole field again, resodded the whole thing, and started over again. So this has been like, this roller coaster ride with him, and trying to establish a complete soil food web community in something that keeps getting ripped up. On top of that, he's forced to use reclaimed water, which has got incredibly high levels of salt, chloride, and all of these other potentially, pharmaceuticals, et cetera, et cetera. And then on top of all that, this field is surrounded by glass buildings. So think of a magnifying glass. Right. You walk out into that field and you're like, oh God, that hurts. So he's fighting everything. And part of the big issue we had with the last go around was he did a flush. This was a product that was 3 different products that were all, 2 of them were told or sold as surfactants, and 1 was sold as a humic acid. And so we did SAP. Was August 19th, 10/17. No, it was 8/19, 10/17. No, so it would have been before that. Anyway, we did 3 series of SAPs, and we did 2 series of tissue. And what we noticed was the chlorides and the salts were through the roof in the tissue, and still pretty high in the sap. But it was like, where is that threshold where you've got so much salt that you're actually going toxic? And how do you regulate that when you're dealing with such a harsh condition and no real way to mitigate it? Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, that's hard.
Right.
Yeah, that's hard. So I'm kind of assuming that there's hard water involved too. High bicarbonates.
Yep.
That's really going to tie up your calcium and your magnesium, and so that's problematic. So chlorides. So high chlorides and sodium, those are easiest for the plants to take up. They're -1 for chloride, negative or +1 for sodium. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, in a cropping system, increasing your other macrocations and macroanions, and that's a lot of money. I mean, quite frankly, to outcompete that. Humic is great. Love humic. But gosh, that is, if you're seeing amazing amount of sodium toxicity, I'm wondering if you have potassium deficiency, because they usually go hand in hand. That's usually the case.
I think he has high potassium.
High potassium and high salt, but no calcium. Yeah. Okay. So no calcium means that the plants are really weak, unfortunately, when you have very little cellular structure. So plants will continue to grow. They're pretty cool. They can use other nutrients in cell walls if they're not using the correct building materials, but it makes the cell walls really weak. Just like if the plant doesn't have a micronutrient, it will use a different micronutrient, and that process will become very energy inefficient. So utilizing different macronutrients in cell walls instead of calcium is very troubling, because it makes weak leaves. They burn easily. The tips burn. I do not have that water. So the water is your biggest input of any cropping, any system at all is water. If they're going to change anything to help that water in some way, because that they're putting the most on of that, and that is the most harmful that they're doing the most harm with that water. If they
And
back up everything else, that water is if they're using bad water, they're doing more harm than good.
that's the whole reason we did the flush, was because they had no rain this year, which is unusual. Normally he gets rain, and the rain helps to push the salts, chlorides down further into the soil profile, make them less available. But he didn't get any rain, and they had an incredibly hot summer. So he was using a tremendous amount of water, almost to the point where we started to see anaerobes. We had a couple of parts, southwest and southeast parts of the field, that actually showed increased populations of ciliates. And I kept saying, "Hey, look, you're crossing the threshold. You need to calm that water down, or do you have, is the field all pitched in that direction? So when you're watering this half of the field, it's all running down there. Is there a way to mitigate the irrigation? Back off in southeast and southwest, and use more in northeast and northwest." And he's like, "I don't have that type of control over the system." And I go, "All right, well, I think the next phase is flush, because if you don't flush, you're going to hit a threshold where the plants are just tips are going to burn. They're not going to grow. And you're going to have some real issues." So he did the flush, and this is where it gets freaking crazy. The root depth, right? So they have what's called a torque. They torque the field, because you've got these 300-pound linebackers with cleats, and if the grass cuts loose, they can wreck, ACLs. They could tear up their legs. They can have all kinds of injuries as a result of not having grass that is can hold that kind of impact and twist as the guys are turning and running and pushing up against each other. So after the flush, the root depth was cut in half. The plants went into shock. They didn't grow, and they didn't turn. He said they yellowed slightly, but they didn't go crazy to the point where he was concerned that management would look at it and be like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Right? So then post flush, I said, "All right, we better do biology and mycorrhizae to see, did you affect the whole system?" And so we did biologicals. They came back fine. The mycorrhizae, although it had lost the root depth, we'd lost root depth, and we'd lost, obviously, infection sites, but we had a huge increase in percentage. In other words, the mycorrhizae freaked out and just shot out. It just started expanding like crazy to try to offset what had happened to the plant. Do you think that was the saving grace of this field, was that the microbiology kicked in and really beefed up the nutrient cycling system to support that survival mode?
Well, if you saw that the mycorrhizae were still there, and that if they had, you don't need to increase populations in mycorrhizae. You just need to not basically not till, if you don't want to wreck the hyphae. So the hyphae becomes an extension of the roots.
Yep.
So even if the actual root depth decreased, the hyphae could have been an extension of the roots, which is really what you want them to do. I am not a proponent of 100% till, 100% no-till. I've seen results on both sides, but if you're trying to really incorporate mycorrhizae and you disrupt the hyphae, then there will be no nutrient cycling.
So
have the same population, because the hyphae is the growing root-like structure, but it's the spore is what you count.
So have you ever looked at sap in roots, mycorrhizae colonized roots versus non-mycorrhized?
People take sap for many reasons, and they many times don't share why we get sap treated and then we get sap untreated. Those are what the samples are labeled, or sap 1 and sap 2. So they're very people hold tight to their data. I don't blame them, but it definitely could have happened, and they didn't call to chat about it.
Interesting. Okay, I had to ask that because I literally spent most of Saturday and a good part of Sunday tearing through all of those reports for Chris, from the biologicals to the soil chemistry to the tissue to the sap, to try to unlock what I can say to him, what kind of advice I can give him moving forward, because as he's transitioning into the fall, he's got to replant. So we've got to have decent chemistry. We've got to have decent biology, because if we don't, the winter rye is not going to take as the Bermuda dies off. So I figured I'd throw that at you because, it's like I have very few people that I can go that deep on. So
if you're looking for increases of soil biology in sap, iron would be the first thing you would go to. Iron, if you have the soil biology that is actually able to digest and make silica into silicic acid, then your silica would increase, but not all biology does that. But iron is found in every soil. So it's like the number 4 component or something huge, but it's usually in a form that the plants can't take up, which is why the plants don't die of iron toxicity. But biology will make that form. It's a redox nutrient, oxidative reductive nutrient. So the biology will make it into the reduced form, which is able to be taken up by the plants. So many times, if you just even get a little bump in iron, especially if you're not adding it, the biology is working.
Great answer. All right, I'll keep that.
First nutrient, and also looking at silica. Also, if your silica is below 20, your soil is, or you don't have a lot of silica digesters at all. And that's usually not great.
So one of the products that I've been working with for years is called Fish Brew. And my buddy Keith's farm on Cape Cod has freshwater diatoms. And they are an amazing source of bioavailable silica. So as they die off, they're just free food for everybody to take up. And so that might be an interesting tool for you in the future as a way to recommend if people are having issues with silica, because I know silica is almost like calcium. It should be one of those elements that we look at a lot closer than we do, because of what it provides for the plant.
Right.
So that's a big win in those situations, because those diatoms, not only are they little oxygen generators, but they can take energy from either sunlight, diffused or not, or pull up minerals from the soil around them. And again, as they're pulling up these minerals, they're releasing a lot of them as well. So, and again, they're releasing them plant available. And it's the diatoms should be looked at through the soil food web and be considered an important part of that, as well as from a chemistry side. They should be looked at as a real valuable tool. And again, this isn't diatomaceous earth. These are living, fully adapted biological creatures. So I figured I'd share that with you.
Well, diatoms do produce a ton of energy. That's where the red tide comes. That's bioluminescence. That's red tides. I mean, all those little teeny tiny microscopic organisms are producing a color change in the ocean.
Yeah, those are actually dinoflagellates.
Oh, dinoflagellates.
Right. I knew you do. And he'll actually have small amounts of those as well. They're bioluminescent. When you stir the water, you can see as they release the energy, that you can see them. Really cool.
I know they are. But diatoms, if that sounds amazing. I'd love to look at the silica increase on those.
Yeah, hit me up after and I'll send you out a gallon of it. so you can play with it. And if you do, you do any microscopy?
I don't. No, I am. I'm loaded up with what I'm doing now. But I was going to say, like a true organic system that has a grower's been really working on it, really working on their soils. I mean, they usually have a silica number on a sap analysis like 120 or higher. So just letting you know, where you can go out and smell the earth and it smells amazing and it's dark and, you know, all that kind of good stuff. It's not organic by neglect, but you can see those numbers. And then, you know, a strawberry fumigation field has like a silica number of 3.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. It's fucking crazy. I don't even want to go down the strawberry rabbit hole. Maybe
They do it for a reason, and there's a lot of ways to come in after fumigation and put your good soldiers back into the soil, right? Fumigation doesn't have to just stop at dead soil. You can bring it back alive. There are ways that you can do that. So I work with everybody, and I understand why they're doing it, but there's also ways that you can come back weeks afterwards and build those populations back up.
See, my thought pattern is change all of their practices. Like get rid of the plastic tarps. Plastic mulch is
I agree.
Soil anaerobic. There's no gas exchange. You can't get oxygen in. You can't get the CO2 out. When you water, and most of those guys overwater out of fear. I mean, you've been around those fields. They're always mud, so they're creating their own pathogens. But that's a whole nother ball of wax, and probably shouldn't go there unless you want to.
I understand the culture and there are ways around it. And they do try. The amount of money that they have to generate to keep their farms going now is pretty astronomical. So, but you know what? I ran into a strawberry farmer that actually made perennials. That's how strawberries are grown here on the West Coast, or annuals. They made them into perennials, and that is a huge step forward. They didn't replant for 2 years, and their second season actually had higher yields than their first, using soil biology and enzymes. And that is unheard of over here on the California coast on large acreage.
Where are they? Are they up north in
Monterey?
Monterey? Okay.
Right in the middle of strawberry haven. So it was really nice to see that. And it can be done, and they are trying.
Are they under the Ryder umbrella?
No, they're not under Ryder umbrella. No, but everyone, grows all together. I mean, there's so many labels, just boom, 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 all grown 25, 50, 100 acres, all right next to each other. Everybody can see. It's flat over here with coast. So everybody sees what everyone's doing.
Yeah, I'm down in Oxnard.
Another haven, right? Oxnard, Ventura. It's Watsonville, Santa Maria, Watsonville, Monterey, Salinas. That's up here. And then mid coast is Santa Maria, right? Got a little tiny bit into Santa Barbara, and then you go into Oxnard, Ventura, and those are our 3 hot zones of strawberries grown annually.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, when I first got here, so this would have been the height of COVID, I crash landed in Oxnard literally 2 days before they shut the world down. And so, we're like, whoa, what the fuck is going on? I never expected to see this in my lifetime where they shut the world down. And so I was working with a local guy out here to try to establish some clients, because I'm like, I don't know when I'm going to be able to get back to what I normally did, which was travel the country to work. And so started poking around here, ran into Harry's Berries, which I don't know if you're aware of them. They're pretty high-end berry company. They sell a lot to New York City. And, they're organic. And they were having a problem with crown rot, and they didn't want to fumigate, so they did anaerobic disinfectant. which I'm sure you're aware of how they do that.
You can only do that down there, by the way. You can't do that up here.
No, why not?
Because the soil has to reach a certain temperature in Monterey, Salinas, and Watsonville won't reach those soil temperatures. That's it. Yeah, it's a great way to disinfect soil, but you have to reach a certain soil temperature for a certain many days. So down there, that works really well, by the way.
Yeah. So in seeing what they were doing and understanding, and at this point, they had already bought all the materials and they were spreading it out and putting the plastic down. The amount of money they spent to do that, oh my God. I was like, you got to be kidding me. So they're like, well, what would you have done? And I said, all right, let's talk about your cultural practices. And I said, first of all, you got to get rid of that plastic tarp and you've got to cut back your watering and you've got to figure another way to prevent the berry from touching the soil. For the audience, if the berry touches the soil, that's it. The berry gets rot and it just spreads right up the plant. So I came up with this concoction of cocoa coir coarse, pit moss, gypsum, and Portland. So Portland is for cement making. It's high calcium. And they made a crust. Now the crust, because of the core chunks, would allow oxygen in and out. Because of the gypsum and the Portland mixing together, created a hard coating that you could walk on without crushing. And it also provided a way for moisture to infiltrate and for gas to come out. So it was now I've created a living mulch system that would work. And we sprayed it on with a hydro seeder, and then they ran their plow, which they usually use to tighten the plastic. They ran that after to smooth it all off. They let it harden for 3 days, and then they ran their puncher across the top and planted it. Now, the original experiments that I did here at my house, the original formula lasted for 2.5 years without any problem. When we went to go do it on the field, unfortunately, the guy that was on top of the hydro seeder put in the ingredients ass backwards. He was supposed to put in the pit moss and the core first, and then dump the gypsum and Portland on top so that they would mix together homogeneously. Well, he put the two powders in first and then the stuff on top so it didn't mix. We plugged up the hoses. It turned into a full day shit show, and the experiment failed. Now, the reason I'm saying this is that I believe there are other ways of doing this, like effectively on scale. And I'd love to talk to the strawberry farmer up there that is doing those perennials, because this would be the perfect application, right? Because they're not going to have to punch holes and plug the old holes. They just plant the plant once and then they till it in. And once they've tilled it in, now you've added minerals to the soil. You've added organic matter to the soil, both in cardboard, which is pit moss, and core is a wonderful source of organic potassium. Anyway, I'm sorry. I got excited about that because it was one of those things that was like, they use like 4 billion square feet of plastic annually down here.
Plastic culture is a big deal. I mean, there is a company in Monterey that is just got funding for a couple million that they are making plastic out of almond hulls, if I'm saying that correctly, and it is biodegradable. So I know, and biodegradable pots, and they're already a nursery, and they've been using it for like 7 years already. It's pretty tried and true. They have. I got to hear them speak. It was pretty cool to see that. I mean, they were definitely they definitely got the funding because they were together. Great science. But all the almonds are, just in the valley. So they're just picking them up. It was pretty great. They're right in the middle of strawberry area. And now they're going to be making biodegradable plastic. I know that doesn't get rid of the plastic, but it's a help.
Oh my God. You've seen the container stuff full of that shit going away. It's horrifying to see that. And a lot of these guys do it twice a year, and they use 2 layers of plastic because what is that weed that pokes through it?
There's a few of them.
Right? And again, those weeds only grow in anaerobic conditions. So if we get an aerobic soil system, we wouldn't have to worry about that damn weed. But anyway, sorry.
Yep.
Well, we're going to have to talk after about some of these other potential contacts for the future, because we got to start making a difference. If we don't now, the next generation is screwed for sure. All right, so let me reel myself back in again. Let's talk about mobile trace minerals and the miners, because I think those are another really important piece of the puzzle.
Mobile trace nutrients. Okay. Nickel, cobalt, those are mobile. Not very many people put on nickel, but the people that do, that have managed to figure out actually how to legally apply it in very small quantities and grains, are doing astronomically well. There's universities that have been picking it up just because it's been increasing the test weight of wheat by so much in very, very, very small amounts, very specific stages of growth. So cobalt is actually mobile as well, and the majority of it is found actually in the roots. So if you are testing for cobalt, that is one that I would highly suggest if you're going to do sap analysis specifically for cobalt. I would hate for you to think that you're getting such a small amount in the leaves. I would actually test the roots too, to have a better understanding of where your cobalt is going. So, but the majority are actually semi-mobile to non-mobile. It actually varies from crop to crop, but in a sap analysis, it's really looking at whether it is foliar applied or applied by the root. Those are really very, very important factors when you're reading a sap analysis on trace elements. Because if you apply to foliar, especially iron, manganese, those guys are going to stay where you put them. And so if you apply to foliar and then took a sap, I don't know, 3 weeks later, and you have some new leaves, you could have actually missed the whole entire foliar itself. And we do see that as where when people aren't taking sap close to a foliar 3 or 4 days, they actually miss the whole entire treatment. So they can get old leaf, which is very high. We'll say, 20 parts per million in the old leaf. And then the new leaf is like hardly 1 part per million. And they're like, what is going on? And I'd be like, did you foliar? And when did you do it? Did you do it weeks ago? So, but if the micronutrient is actually being brought up by the roots, many times those numbers are going to be a lot closer together, more balanced, because the plant is taking it up and it's either chelated or it's in a form that the plants have taken up through the roots and systematically distributed throughout the plant. So hopefully those numbers are a lot closer together. And then that's more of a true understanding of how much of that micronutrient made it up to the newer leaves. Or are you looking at a foliar?
So would you recommend then soil drenches versus foliar on some of these non-mobile trace?
Some people don't have the capability of a soil drench. So, I mean, if you've got some really interesting soil chemistry going on, really alkaline, you are really going to have a hard time taking up iron and manganese, and they're so needed in the plants. If you and those are going to have to be foliared. If you don't have some large turtles, then I would love to see them applied by root. Many people do apply them and they don't see the type of uptake that they were thinking that they were going to see. So they can change to oxidative very fast. So understanding that, so just because you apply it doesn't mean it gets taken up into the plants. I see that quite readily.
And again, so it's chelated. If it's not chelated properly, it doesn't work. If it's too alkaline or too acid, it's not going to work. So there's a lot of other variables. And so hence the foliar kind of does make more sense as far as getting a bigger impact out of the gate, especially because like you said, a lot of these farmers don't have the ability to treat the soil.
But root applied is great if it's getting in 100%. I would just say a lot of people don't fall into that category. But that's the one I'm rooting for.
Oh.
Oh, I know.
So let's talk about molybdenum.
Okay.
That's kind of one of those that most of our soils are depleted of it, and or maybe they're not so much out here, but back east they're horribly depleted.
Well, it's also not a nutrient that is heavily needed in the wild because plants aren't taking up. When the plants are grown in the wild, they're not being given a whole bunch of calcium nitrate. So there are trace amounts of moly because most likely the plants out in the wild are taking up and being able to reduce the nitrogen that they're being given and not given big doses of nitrate, which is probably why nature made it a trace element. But but yeah, moly is needed. It's highly leachable in the soil, absolutely. And if somebody is applying nitrate, I would definitely say those two go hand in hand. It is not the only nutrient needed to reduce nitrate into amino acids and protein. It is just in the nitrate enzyme, just as nickel is in the urea enzyme. But you do need other trace elements. And then you need sulfur, because if you are going to want your amino acids to go into proteins, you're going to need sulfur. But yeah, moly's needed. It is leachable. I would say the more nitrate you have, probably the more moly you're going to need. Definitely at least 1 part per million in a SAP analysis would be recommended with your nitrate uses. It doesn't need to be 1 part the whole year, but when you're growing structure of your plant with your higher nitrogen applications and uses,
You know what? That you led me right into another great question: the difference between ammonia and nitrate. And I don't think a lot of people get that they're different.
Oh yeah.
So maybe
Absolutely.
talk a little on that.
Sure. Well, so nitrate is running thermodynamically uphill and ammonium runs down. So if you're going to go for a 2-mile jog, do you want to go uphill or downhill? Nitrate takes a vast amount of energy to be reduced into a usable nitrogen for the plant. It's one of the most energy inefficient processes for a single process in a plant. Ammonium does take some energy, but not even nearly as much as nitrate. So those are some larger differences. And when you're looking at the N in nitrate, you need to shear off the oxygen to really understand the portion of nitrogen that you're getting. So it's 3 oxygen and 1 nitrogen. So when you're looking at nitrate, people forget that because oxygen is the vast majority of nitrate. But when you're looking at ammonium and you're looking at the nitrogen part of ammonium, well, that's just hydrogen and they don't weigh anything. So the nitrogen portion of ammonium is very similar, not exactly, but very similar to the ammonium. The parts per million of total ammonium is very similar to the N in ammonium. The parts per million of nitrate is very not similar, completely unsimilar, very different than the N in nitrate. If I said that correctly, I don't know.
Yes. So how does the ammonia versus the nitrate affect the plant processes?
Well, they both go in. The plant wants to make them into amino acids and proteins. It's just that when you apply a whole bunch of nitrate, you really need to have all the other macro and micronutrients in play to be able to reduce and have enough energy to reduce that nitrate into amino acids and proteins, you need to have a lot of it. And you need to have enough energy there to do so. So they're both going to be reduced into amino acids and proteins. It's just a matter if the plant has enough energy. And if the plant doesn't have enough energy, then the nitrate sits in your leaves. And it sits in unconverted nitrogen, which means, say, the nitrate that you're adding to your plant, the plant is using 50% of. So every dollar of nitrogen that you're giving, nitrogen, the plant is only using 50 cents of, and the other 50 cents is thrown away. And that's not very good math for growing. And unconverted nitrate, high levels can go down actually the wrong pathway to diseases and pests, which actually make you put out more money to fight those. So there's a whole domino effect to having large amounts of unconverted nitrate in your leaves.
And that would be in tissue or sap or both?
Well, in sap analysis. You get nitrogen volatilization in tissue unless you unless you treat the leaves like sap analysis. So when the leaves warm up, the first thing to go in nitrogen volatilization is nitrate. So numbers coming from tissue leaves are exposed to heat, which even speeds up the volatilization process even faster. So sap analysis is all about keeping the leaves cool in a closed container and running the process in less than 20 minutes, which really minimalizes volatilization. Tissue analysis doesn't take volatilization into account. So really, it's very diluted, but sap analysis can give you the N in nitrate, the N in ammonium, total N, and then a nitrogen conversion efficiency percent, meaning how much of your nitrogen is being converted into amino acids and proteins. That is not a component of tissue. Tissue, again, is total accumulation of nutrients.
So if you have unrealized nitrogen pool in nitrate form in sap, it's not that you have to worry about losing it in volatilization. It's more about the fact that it's bound up and that the plant can't use it. Like you said before, the plant can steal nitrogen out of the leaf as part of the other plant's growing and needs it, but it can't steal it if it's in that form.
No, it needs to be in a more usable form. So, I mean, an example of a problematic situation would be plants that are going into nitrogen deficiency and having high nitrate.
And they can't pull it.
And they can't pull it, and they can't use it. And so somebody, if they didn't understand this, they would potentially add even more nitrate, which could actually make that whole situation much worse.
We call them morons. Don't put more.
They just didn't know. And you talk about volatility. Well, the soil, yes, you can lose nitrogen from the soil, but when you talk about looking at nitrate in a plant, it's inside the vascular bundle. It's pretty difficult to lose it from inside that sheath, right? So
yeah, and that was, that's always been the bitch that, like, I'm a soil engineer too, and when I deal with these engineered soil systems where they only have 1% organic matter and they're using nitrates, they're frying through their organic matter because the microbes use the organic matter as a way of breaking that extra O off of it and releasing that in a more uptakeable form of nitrogen. And so that's always been the battle, is like you're depleting your soils to feed your plant. You need to be using more ammoniacal sources of nitrate so that you're not depleting the very little bit of organic matter you have left. So the way you just explained that is awesome, because that now it kind of makes it easier for people to understand that, oh, okay, in certain circumstances, I should be leaning more, if I'm going to be using a synthetic form of nitrogen, that I should be leaning more toward the ammonia. It's easier to uptake. We're not gonna have a 50% loss in value of it, and it's gonna.
It is acidic though.
Yeah, well, yeah, you do have that. You definitely have that as an issue, and
So
also,
it's not get out of jail free card totally. And you do need to make sure that you have enough trace elements. And if you put too much, actually plants, certain plants, not all plants, but certain plants, certain species can have ammonium toxicity.
yes,
Just
no, that's beautiful. Well put. Well put. Yeah, so back into understanding the difference between ammonia and nitrate in soil versus in tissue. Um, would you say you see a lot less loss as long as you do have the foundational trace minerals of money conversion about applied product versus used product?
I see good conversion when the traces are there. Sulfur is mobile and it's not being it's allowed to go up to the top of the plant, and there's magnesium as well. You could have everything in play, but if you're just hammering those plants with excessive nitrogen, you can still do pretty well at low conversion, because a plant only can convert so much nitrogen in a day. I do not know how much that is, but if there is a serious excess of nitrogen, you're just trying to increase, say, or say blackberry growers, they here in California, if they grow for very large companies, they're being forced to grow at weird times of the year, not necessarily the time of the year that the blackberries want to grow, but it's the market space. So they're really using high amounts of nitrates to get that cane to go from 3 inches to 6.5 or 7 feet. So they're hammering those plants with nitrates, and all the other nutrients may or may not be there, but a lot of times they're growing in February and March, and the soils are really cold. And when you have really cold soils and hammering with a ton of nitrates, it's very difficult to take up all the nutrients that you possibly need, because a lot of it is temperature dependent. So they draw in, bugs, and it's not the only reason, but it is a really good reason why they get some flies and things in later, because they're not wanting to grow that way. That's the market that they need. They have a contract, and if they want to grow, then they need to fill that market.
Yeah, that's the demand market.
That's the demand market, and so nitrate is the fastest way to grow feet of vegetative growth in a very, very, very short amount of time under very high acreage. And commercially.
Yeah, I would love if the audience could actually drive from, say, North LA all the way up to Monterey Bay and just see the miles and miles of tunnels for raspberries, blackberries. Do they put the blueberries in tunnels as well?
Sometimes they do. I have to say, though, less tunnels up here and more tunnels down your direction, which is kind of odd because you're warmer and you don't need the tunnels as much. I would say we need tunnels more, but we're seeing more and more berries under tunnels. But in Mexico, in inland, there's less tunnels, but Oxnard gets really warm. So does Ventura. I will say, though, that the blueberries really suffer, in my opinion, in the tunnels when the leaves get really dirty. The photosynthetic capacity is, they're so dirty. I'm filthy I'm sticky and filthy when I come out of blueberry tunnels, and those leaves have so much dust on them, and that really reduces the photosynthetic capacity, which can really reduce the sweetness of the berry, and it really helps to have those sticky leaves of blueberry rinsed off every now and again.
Interesting. Something I learned something new again. Fantastic. Yeah, the way, like, have you seen all the ones from I think it's Santa Barbara County, the northern part of Santa Barbara County. I mean, there's just like God, hundreds of miles of these tunnels. I mean, it's crazy. And they're new, and I haven't seen them put the canes in yet.
They're hoop houses.
Yeah, they're the ones with the triangles on them, the triangle shaped plastic. They look like geodesic.
Plastic. They're not breathable screen.
No, they're not breathable screen. They're the plastic, the sheeting.
Interesting. I wonder if do they get high wind over there?
Yeah, we get the Santa Anas.
Yep, that's
why.
That's why. Yeah.
All right, sulfur. Let's dive down the sulfur rabbit hole because I'm torturing you today. I'm sorry.
Today's torturous if we're talking about sulfur because I do not have all the answers straight up. I'll just tell you that right now.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Because sulfur is one of those things you tend to see pretty high in both soil and in tissue. Is there a level that concerns you?
So that's another one that sulfur can be much higher on tissue than it can be in sap. And I look at low levels, and that is super concerning because you need sulfur to create proteins. So if you can have really long chain amino acids, but if you don't have enough sulfur, you're not going to create those proteins. And you have to do very specific tests, and I don't actually know what they are, to understand how much amino acids and how much proteins you have. People often say amino acids and proteins, but they're quite different. And what you really want, the goal, is proteins. Amino acids are cool. Those are great, but we really do want the proteins. So sulfur is really needed in that in seed production. So if that sulfur isn't able to move, then that's a huge problem. And you're right, there can be a lot of sulfur in this system, and it's just not being able to move up the plant. And looking at white papers and such, I mean, I've glimpsed that nitrogen excess exacerbates sulfur deficiency. And I have seen this before. So extremely excessive nitrogen many times makes sulfur act like immobile. It gives it a contingency. Sulfur and nitrogen are highly linked. And so if you have excessive nitrogen, the plant isn't moving that nitrogen to the top of the plant. It's pushing it down to the bottom. It's an excess macro mobile, which means storage is at the bottom of the plant. And if the plant is pushing excess nitrogen to the bottom of the plant, sulfur isn't getting a ride to the top.
Very cool. Yeah. So I think it's all proteins can be amino acids, but not all amino acids can be proteins. Is the thought process. And just for the audience, when a protein is folded, it creates an intercellular release of certain things that the cell needs to do, functions of certain kinds. So that's why it's so important to have that high level of proteins. Yes, you need the amino acids, but the proteins are the intercellular function. Say it's the cafeteria for the intercellular health. And I got to close this shade, or I'm going to get blinded in a minute. Hang on one second.
No problem.
It's that time of the year. So back to sulfur, we talk about using gypsum as a soil conditioner, right? And I know Elaine Ingham is like a big anti-proponent to gypsum because of the excess sulfur and how it can, I know it's be over soon. It can cause that soil to flocculate, to crust up and harden. So in that being said, do you like to see sulfur used as a separate product versus mixed with calcium?
I just want sulfur to get in the plant.
Just give me the sulfur.
New AGE Laboratories is a third-party laboratory. So when we talk about low sulfur, if whatever the grower is using, I highly suggest to not use it or apply it in a different manner if it's not getting into the plant and they're seeing that lime green at the top of the plant, low sulfur situation. But sulfur can be used to leach out high sodium, and that is a benefit. If you have that situation. I mean, it does cause crusting, but high sodium soil actually will cause chunks and clumping because sodium only has a +1, so it can't hold hands with anyone else. It doesn't create these soil bridges. So I don't know what is worse, is what I'm saying, for what people are using gypsum for.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's very helpful. It's kind of like it's better to use calcium and sulfur separately than to join them because, again, you're not going to get the predictability that you can with the independence versus the combination.
Well, and you're going to get slow release, but budget wise, we have everyone has different budgets, and application, if they're able to apply in an area with a high amount of water, I mean, that's gold. But if you're just putting it on the top and it's just sitting there, then that's not doing anyone any good. And I do see that quite a lot. more than I should.
All right, so we've hit on a lot of the really important things to understand between sap and tissue, mobile versus non-mobile. Gone down the rabbit hole pretty deep. Is there anything that you want to backpedal on that you and I were talking about that maybe we didn't get all the way through the subject? Because we touched on a lot of stuff today.
Gosh, we did touch on a lot of things today. No, I'm just I mean, I got to go to a regenerative ag expo in San Luis Obispo, California last week, and it was really interesting. There was a study done on why people want to go regenerative, what was pushing the farmer, why they would even want to do that, and yields were still at the top of the list. They interviewed a lot of farmers and they created a word map with the biggest word, being the most said, and the smallest word being the least said, and yields still at the top of the list, and soil health was just like right in the middle. So when you're talking about soil health and regenerative versus organic, and you're a consultant, or if you're a grower, I definitely would look at your top 3 reasons of why you want to go in one direction or the other and see if your reason match up with the way that you would like to farm. Because that information was actually really interesting, that large acre wine grape growers, the soil health aspect was actually middle of the ground for going regenerative. So it's interesting that maybe some people have expectations that aren't matching up with their farming methods.
So organic versus regenerative, which one was yielding more? Did they get into that?
No, they didn't figure into that, but I mean, regenerative is, a lot of more types of growing fall in under regenerative. You don't have to be organic to fall under regenerative, right? You can be organic by neglect. You can be, growing organic where no one really should and pumping in a ton of water. Is that regenerative? No. Is that a good source of our resources or a good use of our resources? No. But regenerative is, I think, I do love organic, biodynamic, sustainable. I want everyone to move in the direction of, yes, you can farm with less nitrogen. You can, and I've seen it done on thousands of acres. Less trying to find alternative ways for pests on large acres, not just on small acres. Looking at possible beneficial insectaries, understanding what that means. There are grants out there for actually planting native species. Tons of research out there that native species actually harbor beneficials. Cool stuff like that. That's all regenerative, but you can be organic too and do that as well. If I can have a conventional grower do 40% less pesticides and entering into the regenerative zone, because usually with one reduction, another one will follow. Hey, let's see if we can get away with 10% less nitrogen. Hey, let's try this. And then it usually follows. These steps follow into regenerative. And that could be a 2,000 acre grower that 3 years ago was just an MPK, chemical grower, that's the way he was feeding his family. But then he just found a new way.
Yeah, and I think it's important to state that regenerative means it's regenerating, it's making it better, it's increasing the indigenous population of plants, bugs, fungi, everything. And whereas organic is more sustainable, it's just maintaining a certain path. It's not pushing for greater soil health or greater diversity, ecological diversity. So, and I think that's
merge the two. You can put the two together.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I was all about the science behind organic and regenerative cannabis cultivation. I actually created a conference that we traveled the country because I understand the dynamics between both and how they should be merged. So that, yeah, you're an organic grower, but you also are regenerating the soil. You're not sustaining the soil. Because I think, at this point in time, we really don't have we can't go too much further down the rabbit hole of just pollution, take. We can't. That's not sustainable.
That's not sustainable. And
Right.
I will say that over 50% of all the Earth's population of species is found in the soil. And there is a new study out, enumerating soil biodiversity by Anthony et al. 2023. It caught my eye that if we have over 50% of the species, of the Earth species, because the ocean's pretty big, in the soil, that if we're having healthy soil and regenerating it, that's for a reason that we can find 50% or more. Yeah. Boom. That's I'm in this space, and that's still, it's still exciting for me to hear. And all those species must be in the soil for a reason if we do it right. That's all.
Agreed. Well, we know the reason because the fruit is bigger, it's sweeter, it's got more vitamins. Biologically grown systems or crops are what we're used to prior to the big push for the green revolution and NPK. We were all, as a species, humanity and all the animals and species that live on the surface, we're all way healthier. And that's kind of why it's so important that we push back toward regenerative practices. And to be honest with you, I'm amazed that soil health was in the center of that discussion. Because that's huge.
It was really, and that's why I took notice of it, and I have like 15 pages of notes. But it was interesting to match expectations to practices,
which is always a challenge.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge. The end of the day, if you don't make expectations, you're not coming back.
Right.
So we're about half an hour more, and we've got 3 questions. So this is normally about time I break into questions because, you never know where the questions lead. They could lead into another half an hour conversation. So, Ken, welcome back. And why don't you go ahead and fire away with the questions?
Okay, we've got Silly Lily first. Leighton, is there any way they can filter that reclaimed water for the field use? That's for the Dallas Cowboys field.
Absolutely. The problem is money, time, and space. You're dealing with a high volume of water. You really need to filter it in a cost-effective way, so not using a tremendous amount of electricity. So that means filtering it through ponds or wetlands, which all work great, but then they need space. So Dallas jokes about their national bird, or Texas calls their national bird the sky crane, because there's so much development constantly going on. If you've ever driven down there, they got 8-lane fucking highways going one direction and 8 lanes on next going the other direction. I mean, they say everything is bigger in Texas. It is. And it's the space, like the way they use their land. I personally think it's better than Southern California. In other words, when they build these monster housing developments for people, they at least have, you can go outside, stand beside your house and spit, and you might not be able to hit your fence for your neighbor. Here in California, I can spit and hit every freaking house around me. So, they've provided a little bit more living space, but that limits the amount of ability for you to do things like, how do we recharge the groundwater? How do we filter out the nitrates, the hydrocarbons, and all the shit that's coming in with all that rain? So they have rain issues, like we do. When it comes, and it can't sink into the ground very quickly. So that's the unfortunate part of reclaimed water, is that they're reclaiming it to dump it. They want to get rid of it as fast as possible. So filtration's probably not like a realistic issue. I think more along the way of what Jenny talks about is using biology and chemistry to alleviate that issue and push the salts further, the chlorides and salts further down into the soil, so that they're not directly affecting the plant.
Also, is there a hard pan?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
they're getting trapped on that hard pan,
Right.
and it's really hard to get rid of them, period.
Yeah, and you're not. Yeah, I mean, Jenny, you've seen the deep tilling rigs. They're plowing down 3.5 feet. I mean, these tractors are huge that are dragging these rippers. Yep. But again, all they did was move the hard pan down lower, right? So what did they really do? Right. Now, if they use those deep drippers and actually pump down compost tea, so that they use the microbes to prevent the hard pan from actually forming to the level where it would take millennia for them to break it down, that would work. But again, just getting people to understand the use of compost, and that all composts aren't equal, and some have biology and some are just chemistry. That's a whole nother conversation.
I actually have seen those rippers where on the back of it, they do have a hose, and they actually have different levels and different mixes that are coming out at the different levels. Yep.
It has become more common, and more so in the chemistry side, less the biology. But there are people that are doing, the biologicals as well, which is good. It's like having Jenny say that soil health was even on the freaking map at that conference. That's a huge step in the right direction.
We are making headway on the knowledge front. It's just a slow and steady pace, and we'd like it to be a really fast race right now.
F1.
Yeah, damn right. I'm thinking more like Elon Musk's shuttle launch. Okay?
You're gonna go all rocket ship man on me.
Hey man, why not? Go big or go home, right? So our next question is from Gil. Can Jenny elaborate on the biology that can make silica and iron available, and any suggestions on how to encourage in an indoor setting?
Okay.
Wow.
Not all biology breaks down silica. In general, it does, but not all biology. So adding, I mean, if you're going to do an indoor grow, many times in a small space, people add monosilicic acid because on large scale, it's not budget friendly. But monosilicic acid in indoor grows, if you wanted to do a trial and see if that was something that would work for you, that is available. Silicic acid is silica available for plants. I don't know the biology that makes silica into silicic acid, but in general, the trends in sap analysis, and so tissue you cannot test for silica because the acid destroys it. So that's why silica isn't on a tissue test, because acid is used in that analysis. But in general, that's what I said. But people that are biologically improving their soils, not by neglect, but by inputs, cover crops, things like that, their silica increases, and there is usually 100 part per million or more difference between the silica numbers, which is pretty great. Like a dead soil is like, 7, 10, 15. Organic is usually 120, 160 higher. So it's a pretty big difference. But in general, a lot of if you're going to be using a biological input and you're using diversity, you're going to have at least one that's breaking down silica, if not more. Will all of them? No, they will not. But your silica numbers should increase, and your iron should increase as well. So that is, they're making it, manganese should increase. If you're using bacteria along with beneficial soil fungi, you should also see a nice little jump in phosphorus in a few months. It's not going to be in a few weeks, because you're adding spores that need to sporulate and grow hyphae. And that's how the phosphorus is. That's a macronutrient increase. So along with other things as well. Did I answer the question? I forgot it.
Say again.
Did I answer the question? I forgot the whole thing.
Yes, you absolutely did answer the question. And I love the way you said biology, as well as some of these other practices like cover croppings, is the key to the whole thing. And the only thing I'd like to add to that is, if you are going to use biologicals, it's always easy to go buy the bugs in a jug, especially now you're seeing, like, God, all the big ag companies are selling bugs in a jug. Now, they do work. They will release short term, but unfortunately, you're not colonizing. You're only giving it a bump for a short period of time, and then you have to go back and reuse it again. So how to get those long term so they colonize? Well, that's where it comes into making biologically complete compost. Anybody can do it. You can liquefy it. You can spray it on the plants. You can spray it on the soil, and that's going to give you that long term bump, so that you're not going to have those kinds of issues that you're talking about, short term issues versus long term issues. And as far as like trying to get iron, it'll be released from the plants that are being degraded in your compost, because they're all going to have it in them. Now, if you're trying to do like a startup and you're going fresh in, just make sure you're using a chelated iron, because that's really important. That's going to be a lot more friendly to limited microbes, because they'll still be able to break it down to some degree. Whereas unless you have what we call degraders, which again will come from a really good biocomplete compost, if you don't have degraders, they can't break off those first couple electrons so that you can start to release or soften the iron out of the mineral form. Like phosphorus, organic phosphorus, forget it. it's locked up rock hard. The only thing that can do it is the acids that come from mycorrhizae. Saprophytic, even their acids aren't strong enough to mine phosphorus in an organic form. Again, that's why we push these kinds of products, these biologicals, so that you do get the potential out of your soil system, your soil solution. And this goes back to that real interesting fact that phosphorus in the soil is not a problem. It's only when that phosphorus comes in contact with aquatic water, that's where you get the phosphite solubilizing bacteria, that every single piece of organic phosphorus is instantly released into solution. Then you get the algae plumes and the die-offs and the degrading of water systems. But I thank you for answering that. It was wonderfully put, Jen.
And
the phosphorus bound up in biology does not break down. So you have it bound. So the more biology you have, aquatic water doesn't come into play, which is nice.
Yes.
It's all about the biology.
Well, unless you're using fish brew.
Oh, okay. Yeah, a caveat on that one. Yes. And Gil says, thank you, Jenny.
You're welcome.
So not so much of a question.
Yeah, not that one wasn't a question. The next question, I'll probably have to premise this, but looking into a better method of concentrating the sap. Boiling is harsh. This is the gentleman that collects sap from the trees, and he wants to take it actually down to a powder laden. I'm just wondering if the system you have for vibrating would take the water out and leave the material that he's looking for.
Well, we don't use any heat whatsoever, none, and we use vortexing.
Okay.
Not vibrating. So vortexing is gonna do it. It's definitely not going to get you into a powder, but it will get off. It will concentrate it fast.
Centrifuge.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome answer. No, because you try to vibrate sap, it's just going to turn into a gunky.
Yeah. Especially if it's high silica. Oh my gosh.
Well, this is what he's pulling out from the trees, right? So it's got everything in it. But yeah, like I know in the oil industry, we use a centrifuge for cleaning the water, and we call it dewatering, where all the hard material is taken out at the level of the screen and the water's just gone again, right?
Well, ish.
Yeah.
It will just separate, and you will be able to pipette most of the separation out, and vortexing or centrifuging takes a matter of minutes, and then you pipette out what you want, and the bottom is mainly your minerals and your nutrients, right?
So do you crush the leaves before you do this?
Nope. We do not crush the leaves. Crushing the leaves goes into the vacuoles. So if you did crush the leaves, you will go into storage of the plant, which is vacuoles, which is great. I mean, if you want to know what the plant is taking up and storing, then that would just, if you crush, then you would need to know what you're measuring. It's always what are you measuring? It's the test wouldn't be invalid. It's just what are you measuring? Just like the difference between bricks out in the field and the bricks in a lab is different because of mainly the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll increases a brick's rating. It's not invalid. It's just understanding that maybe you want to send a few tests into the labs to see the bricks and then calibrate that with what you're seeing in the field, because a lot of things refract. So it's not invalid. There's multiple ways of testing. Just what are you testing?
Yeah, that's always been an issue, is what are you testing for?
Right.
Because you can manipulate the test to show any kind of result you want, depending on what you're testing.
And if you crush the leaves, you would get increased macronutrients, a lot of potassium, for instance, and you could manipulate that data to, I have a lot of potassium and my product works, if you wanted to.
So how do you extract the sap? You just put the whole leaf in the centrifuge and spin it like hell?
No.
Is that proprietary, Jenny?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Fair enough. I kind of noticed with the hesitation. So zips the word.
We hope that one day it's not, and we love collaboration, and we hope one day. We don't want to be secretive forever, and we don't think we should, and because there's a lot of growers out there, and one lab isn't enough.
Yes. Yeah.
That's for sure.
There are others. So, but yeah, we would love a collaboration meeting of all the SAP labs, but they're not into it. So we'll just keep trucking.
Well, that kind of brings up the point on your website is sign up for our analysis education workshop. So you guys actually put on workshops for what purpose? Like to just for somebody like me to be able to look at the paperwork you're giving me and know what I'm talking about, or what?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we want people to use the results because we have really fast turnaround time, 48 hours unless you give us a sample on a Friday. But it doesn't matter the speed if you're not able to read it. And I can't I can't get 100 calls a day. And so I initiated education when I came to New Age so that we can talk to a lot of people at once. And we encourage everybody to bring their data. And it's a 2-hour education. And then we give it to you as a recording. It's open Q&A with myself, but also with the owner of the lab. And not very many people get to talk directly with him anymore. He's so busy, but he is there and he's answering. We try to get to everyone's questions. So we've been refining and refining. We only offer in the winter because that's about all the time that we have. We try to narrow it down to crop groups. And yeah, that's something that we provide.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And you were the one that initiated that too, correct, Jenny?
Well, yes, because I saw the need that everybody couldn't interpret their own results, and that just talking to individual people, I was answering the same question over and over. So I was like, well, why don't we answer this question for everybody? Mm-hmm. What's a nutrient? What's new? What is tissue versus SAP? How to look at over the season? How to make decisions based on SAP? Things, looking at actual data from drought versus flood, looking at 400 data points to create your own database and perennials, things like that.
So do you see that your lab will ever go in the direction like some of the other ones that do soil and SAP side by side?
We do soil and SAP side by side.
Okay, so I wasn't sure. Cool. So that was the report I got from Chris.
We do something called a rapid soil, which is really, it was brought over by Australia. Australia has been using SAP actually a long time. And if you want to talk about growers that understand drought, they're amazing at it. They don't have drought and undrought year. They just have drought. They're just drought. And they are huge in the grape market, and they can grow on very, very small amounts of moisture. We're like, I don't know why we all just don't go over there and learn, because they've been growing without water for a very long time. And so we brought a test over from there. It's called Rapid Soil. It's like saturated paste, but it's looking at the soil and the water directly into the root zone. We want people to take it. We want the irrigation water. We want the soil in the root zone. I don't want it anywhere outside the root zone at all. And people always ask me, what's the average depth? I was like, well, you need to take a shovel and see where your roots are. I'm assuming it's 6 or 8 or 10 inches, but I don't know that. I've been to multiple places where, gosh, there's only 3 feet or 3 inches, and then you've got your roots here, or we can't find any roots. Where are the roots? Keep digging. So it's really important to understand that when the nutrients are taken up into the roots, it's mainly your water. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio of saturated paste. A saturated paste is literally a paste. And that paste is not going into the roots. It's a paste. It's like sandy butter. Like, that's not what's going into the roots. The roots is the nutrients passing through the soil in a soil solution going into the roots. And that's what we do. And many times people use that in the fall with an old leaf, because there are no new leaves, or most of the time in the springtime, they take a whole plant of an annual and then they do a rapid soil, or they do a new leaf of a perennial and a rapid soil, so they can have a direct comparison, because there is no old leaf, doesn't exist. So they don't do it all year round. It's just to help bridge some gaps where a new leaf is non-existent or an old leaf is non-existent. And that irrigation water, I've seen rapid soil with irrigation water, and I've seen rapid soil with DI or lab water. Very different. Oh my goodness, night and day. So I strongly suggest, if you're going to look at a comparison, really want to see how great or how poor your irrigation water is mixed with your soil. It's a great comparison. Just do it once. You don't have to do it all the time, but it's a good learning to really understand, when you irrigate, this is what your roots are seeing.
Being that water is the transportation.
The water is the transportation.
So are the results with DI water better or worse?
Well, they're much better. Night and day.
Interesting, because you've ionized everything out of the water.
And there's no sodium and there's no chloride. And especially for your younger annuals, and you're trying to get a whole bunch of phosphorus in there, and you're irrigating with highly chlorinated water, that is the anion that's going to get in faster, easier, better. And so your anion balance, especially for young annuals, can be 92% chloride. And
okay, maybe we better be specific. What is DI water?
Deionized water. It's everything is taken out of it. So it's dead water, basically.
It's kind of like RO, but worse. Like they say, whatever you do, don't drink it, because it'll just strip your body. Whereas with RO, you can drink it. Is it depleting some of your minerals? Yeah, it is. But you're getting those minerals hopefully back in your food. Whereas DI, man, forget it. It's like drinking an acid.
I'd never heard of it before, so I was wondering if our audience, I wanted to make sure they understood what it is.
That's what laboratories use. So if you're using a soil test with any kind of moisture put into it, I highly recommend adding irrigation, calling your laboratory. Hey, is it okay if I use my own irrigation water? If they don't specifically say that on their protocol.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, Jenny, when I got the test results back from Chris, there was a page that didn't have a name on top of it. It just had a spreadsheet. So it was an Excel spreadsheet. And when I printed it, it came out in 5 or 6 pages. Was that your test result?
No, we don't. I mean, we provide data in Excel spreadsheets, absolutely, upon request, but all of our reports are in templates.
Got you.
And he couldn't give you the Excel spreadsheet, but it's hard to read that way.
Oh, it's horrible.
It's like, we provided people with large amounts of data. That's all they want. But if you're just looking at side by side a few samples, I highly suggest keeping it in the template, unless you're doing something like graphing it a whole season long or something.
Yeah, so I don't know whether, again, I'll have to talk to Chris to find out if that was your report or someone else's, because I got a couple of reports from New Age. I got another report from, I think it was rock soil. that did leaf tissue. And then I got this Excel spreadsheet, 3 different ones over 3 months, but no title, so I don't know who did the test. So I'll confirm with him if that was you, because maybe he just sent me the raw data without
just the raw data, right?
Yeah, that's probably what it was.
Which is not very helpful to you.
Well, I had to literally like print out the 6 sheets and then lay them over each other to kind of figure out, all right, how do I read this test result? But
set up a war room of what your action plans. Yeah.
On my dining room table.
Yep.
Literally.
Yep. That's what it would look like. Yep.
So Ghetto Hippie actually had a question when we were talking about the water. Is that like heavy water?
Heavy water is in hard water?
No, heavy water is in nuclear water.
Oh gosh, I'm out of my league. I'm gonna step aside.
Heavy water is I don't have the exact answer, but it's kind of like that H3O5. Like they're adding other components to it, getting them to bond electrically, and it's kind of the way you look at anytime you're trying to do a reactive process like nuclear fission. If you have anything in the water, it will bond to the rods, and then the rods will touch, and then you will have a nuclear explosion. So it's tricky. Ghetto Hippie, why don't you Google it and you'll probably find it. It's part of figuring out how to get to a non-nuclear reaction, but you get the fission.
Yeah, I don't deal with that.
That was like zing over my head too. Okay.
I don't deal with that.
Jenny, let me ask you one other question. So, have you ever noticed a difference in variation between lab to lab? Like you send the same soil results, same soil to the same different labs, and they're all over the fucking map.
Yeah. Yes.
How do you compensate for that?
Should ask somebody outside the laboratory sector.
Now don't get yourself into trouble, Jenny. Okay.
You need to look at secondary witnesses. You need to, because the plants tell you this, the soil tells you. If you're sending water or soil or sap or tissue out just because somebody told you, then you're just going to get the results, and you're probably not going to do anything and put it in a file. And I understand that. But if you're doing it to learn, I would send multiple tests. I would do multiple sap, tissue, soil, Haney, water, very important. I would look at them together because they work better together anyway. And if there's always like one crazy outlier, then I would call and be like, how are you getting this? What does this mean? How are you getting here? And just use it as a learning opportunity, because you could be looking at it differently. They could be humics, testing of humics. Are they putting in ash? Are they not putting in ash? Humics, 16%, probably not a normal humic percent at all. Humic at 9%, yeah, that's probably doable, absolutely. But there is no criteria for, are you going to ash it and subtract out the ash, or ash it and keep the ash in? I don't know the whole analyses, but I do know owners of humics, and I know the director of the Humic Fulvic California Society, however you mix those words up. And the testing is different, and understanding humic or ash or no ash. If you are looking at anything with a spore in it and you get these astronomical counts.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right at the very end.
oh, that hurt.
Oh man, I'm not sure if she's gonna come back up.
Yeah, she's frozen out hard.
Yeah,
And it's right at the end of the podcast too. Ugh. And that was so important. So important. Yeah, and that goes back to that testing methodologies and SOPs, and all labs are different, and that's why you get such radically different results from different labs. And yeah, I always send in multiples, but even then, you still get not radically different results, but you at least have a way to average it and get some kind of idea what's going on.
yeah.
But we didn't get to thank her, and so I'll have to text her and just let her know that we missed her last answer, and I'm sure we'll have her back on again in the future as things progress. But
And I've actually asked her to come on with Luna. I think they'd have a wild conversation,
Oh,
totally different than what you've had with her.
definitely different.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully she takes you up on it, and I wanted to ping her, tell her if she comes on with Luna that she needs to post up when those conferences, when those those educational webinars are coming on, because I think that's a huge advantage for people. Because like when I started trying to read tests and shit, it was a nightmare because you only get bits and pieces. You don't get the whole goddamn answer on a lot of this stuff. And then you start looking into the relationships between different things, and you got high sulfur and low nitrogen, you got this, and you have all kinds of different problems. So
yeah,
anyway.
exactly. Anyway, guys, I guess that's I'll end it. I was gonna mention that she's got those courses, and to check them out, go to her IG, etc. Leighton, do you have anything coming up? Are you on tour yet? What's going on?
No, I'm just working, my friend. I'm just a bunch of projects simultaneously, so my time has been very limited. And so it is what it is. But just keep in mind.
Any word on an update from our friends at Ecosphere Science on the Muncher?
So I'm trying to get Craig and Leaf on simultaneously. We will go down, genetic, DNA, metabarcoding, the differences between all of these. Then I'm going to get them on one by one so we can pull apart or suss out their different strengths. And then hopefully by then we will have the data points assembled into the pipeline. See, there's a whole new language when you get into DNA. You got pipelines, you got primers, you got different testing methodologies. And so it gets complicated if you can't speak the language. So again, I was told you, I don't know how many months ago, I'm learning a whole new language at this point and trying to explain it and talk professionally about it. So hopefully in another couple of months, we'll be able to get them on with an update. I will say this, they're at a really interesting transition point that could be super beneficial for them and the technology, but I can't say much about it at this point in time.
Like Jenny, it's proprietary right now.
At this point in time, it is. It's just sensitive. So yes, happy
Thanksgiving. Yep.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there. And Ken, as always, thank you so much for all the behind the scenes work that you put in on this, and appreciate you. And to the audience, hope you enjoyed the show. That was another pretty deep and twisted one. But again, trying to get more of the science behind some of these tools out into the public.
Exactly. And guys, for the R&D, we'll have a show tomorrow in the afternoon. Andy on Wednesday, and I believe Luna's going to be on holidays for Thanksgiving on Thursday, and then it'll be back to the OGs. And who do you have next week, Leighton?
I don't know. I lost track. Do I have somebody?
Yeah. Oh, yes. We definitely have somebody. Just let me grab the old day timer here, make sure on who it is. Catch up to the month here. Oh, I'm still in September. November, Jim Kurtz. No, that was last week. Stefan, Jenny, and I don't have anybody written down, but I do know we have somebody for next Monday. I just can't remember who. The lady on the bees.
Oh, yeah. Brain
Yeah,
cramp. She's signed up.
Yes.
Not Jenny. We're just talking to Jenny.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, good. She's a wonderful person. Really driven to make some really big changes. And yeah, we just
Alicia.
yes,
Alicia Forrester.
Alicia, correct. We just exchanged an NDA, so we're going to really start to have more fun together as things start to unfold. So yeah, that'll be another great show. And then what about after that? Are we back to an empty book?
No, for the 4th. Oh geez, let me bring my email back up. It's all in my thing on my email. December 4th. Giovanni. Your buddy there.
I have too many friends, my friend.
You don't call him Giovanni, Craigo or something.
Craig?
Yeah, with the energy fields off of the.
Yes, John.
Okay, yeah, John.
Okay, cool. And then after that, we open up. So I'll get Craig.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
Yeah, he built the one of those copper cages with all the crystals hanging on, kind of like a fur day, but it's a little bit different. It's more of an energy collector.
Oh, I've seen some pictures of it. It looks phenomenal, guys. You guys are going to really love it. Anyway, guys, we'll end the show there, and we'll talk to you guys next week.